Imagine this. You're sitting on a luxury airplane, surrounded by passengers who seem to have everything in life. Suddenly, a flight attendant, with a look full of disdain, leans over a passenger and says in a sharp voice. The woman, an Afro-descendant in her 40s, dressed in an elegant pearl gray outfit, simply looks at her calmly. Her name is Elena Carter. Her voice is soft, yet firm. Passengers glance over, some uncomfortable, others secretly enjoying the drama. The flight attendant, Patricia, clenches her jaw. To her, Elena doesn't belong there. The flight on Luxair isn't for just anyone. Leather seats, champagne in crystal glasses, an exclusive experience for those who can afford it. Patricia has worked there for years, and she prides herself on maintaining the right atmosphere. To her, Elena simply doesn't fit. But what Patricia doesn't know is that Elena Carter doesn't just belong in that seat, she owns the plane. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and write in the comments what city you were from. Elena Carter sat calmly in her first-class seat, her elegant gray pearl outfit contrasting with the luxurious leather seats around her. The atmosphere was filled with the quiet murmurs of wealthy passengers, sipping champagne and enjoying their exclusive flight experience. A flight attendant, Patricia, approached with a look of disapproval. She stopped beside Elena and, with a sharp tone, demanded that she move to the back of the plane. Her words were firm, almost threatening. Elena simply met her gaze with quiet confidence and refused. Passengers turned their heads, some intrigued, others amused by the unfolding scene. Patricia's irritation grew. She insisted again, her voice colder this time. But Elena remained unmoved. Luxair was no ordinary airline. It was a private luxury carrier catering to society's elite. Patricia had worked here for years, ensuring that only the right people occupied these seats. To her, Elena did not fit. Elena, however, had no intention of explaining herself. Instead, she calmly told Patricia to check the passenger list. But Patricia didn't. She didn't need to. At least, that's what she believed. In her mind, she already knew who belonged and who didn't. Frustrated, Patricia reached for her phone, ready to call security. But before she could make the call, the overhead speaker crackled to life. The captain's voice came through, firm and commanding, instructing Patricia to report to the cockpit immediately. She hesitated, then turned and walked away. Moments later, she returned, her face pale, her hands unsteady. Gone was the arrogance in her posture. She approached Elena and, in a hushed tone, apologized. Elena looked at her without anger, without triumph, just quiet certainty. Then, with a calm but firm voice, she spoke. "It's not about who I am. It's about how you treat people." Silence filled the cabin. Some passengers lowered their heads, perhaps reconsidering their own judgments. Others watched, taking in a lesson they hadn't expected on a luxury flight. That day, Patricia learned something she would never forget. And maybe, so did everyone else on that plane. Patricia stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The weight of her mistake settled heavily on her shoulders. She had spent years perfecting the art of hospitality, yet in one moment, she had let her prejudice overshadow her professionalism. Elena, sensing the tension, picked up her phone and sent a brief message. A few seconds later, one of the airline's senior executives walked into the cabin. His presence alone made the passengers sit up straighter. He approached Patricia and motioned for her to step aside. His voice was low but firm as he spoke to her. She listened, nodding occasionally, her face growing redder with each passing second. Elena remained in her seat, unaffected by the quiet commotion around her. She had encountered situations like this before. People who assumed, judged, and acted before knowing the truth. It no longer surprised her, but it still disappointed her. The executive turned toward Elena, his expression apologetic. He assured her that this behavior did not reflect the values of the airline, and that steps would be taken to ensure it never happened again. Elena simply nodded, accepting his words but knowing that real change only came through action. Patricia returned to her duties, quieter now, more measured in her interactions. She avoided looking at Elena directly, but the lesson had been learned. As the flight continued, a few passengers, who had watched the scene unfold, took a moment to acknowledge Elena, some with a nod, others with quiet words of admiration. Elena, however, remained the same. She sipped her drink, pulled out her tablet, and got back to work, unaffected by the whispers around her. She hadn't boarded this flight to make a statement. She had simply wanted to travel in peace. But if her presence had forced even one person to rethink their assumptions, then perhaps this flight had been worth more than just the miles traveled. The tension in the cabin lingered like an unspoken storm. Patricia moved stiffly, her once confident posture now hesitant, as if the weight of her actions had physically burdened her. She forced a smile as she attended to the other passengers, but the whispers had already spread. Elena, poised and unfazed, glanced out the window. The vast sky stretched endlessly beyond, a quiet reminder of how small moments like these could expose the depths of human nature. She had seen this play out before, assumptions made, judgment passed, and then the inevitable regret. But this time, it was different. A deep voice interrupted the hushed murmurs. "Excuse me, ma'am." Elena turned to see the man who had scoffed at her earlier. The businessman in the tailored suit, the one who had questioned why she didn't just move. He now looked uneasy, shifting in his seat like someone battling his own conscience. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't mean to—" His voice trailed off, uncertain of how to fix what had been broken. Elena studied him for a moment before offering a small, knowing smile. "It's never about knowing who someone is," she said, her voice calm but weighted with meaning. "It's about treating people with dignity, regardless of who they are." The businessman swallowed hard and gave a quick nod before turning away, shame flickering in his expression. The plane hummed along, but the atmosphere had shifted. People were more aware now, more cautious in their glances, as if realizing they had been part of something bigger than just a misunderstanding. Then, a chime rang through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be experiencing some turbulence ahead, so please fasten your seatbelts." As if on cue, the plane jolted, a sudden dip sending a gasp through the cabin. Glasses clinked, a tray toppled, and Patricia, still unsettled, lost her balance. In an instinctive motion, Elena reached out, steadying the flight attendant before she could fall. Their eyes met, one pair filled with quiet strength, the other with a newfound humility. Patricia straightened, smoothing her uniform with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. Elena nodded once, her grip lingering just long enough to let Patricia know some lessons are best learned the hard way. The turbulence passed, but the impact of that moment remained. Elena, composed as ever, sat back in her seat. She had no interest in humiliating the woman, only in making her understand. The past had taught her that change didn't come from anger, but from realization. And Patricia was realizing, whether she liked it or not. Minutes passed, the hum of the engines filling the silence. Then, the sound of footsteps, quick, deliberate. The captain emerged from the cockpit, a tall man with silver-streaked hair. His presence commanded attention. He stopped beside Patricia, his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter," he said, turning toward Elena with a respectful nod. "I sincerely apologize for any mistreatment you've experienced on this flight." Elena offered a polite smile. "Thank you, Captain, but I believe the moment speaks for itself." The captain's gaze flicked to Patricia, who stood stiffly, her fingers curled into her palm. "Step into the galley," he instructed. Patricia hesitated before obeying, disappearing behind the curtain. A murmur rippled through the passengers, some curious, others uneasy. Elena simply exhaled, knowing the lesson wasn't over yet. A few moments later, Patricia returned. Her face was pale, her eyes slightly red. She swallowed hard and approached Elena, her voice lower than before. "I was wrong," she admitted, her tone laced with something Elena hadn't heard before, genuine humility. "I misjudged you, and I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I'm sorry." A hush fell over the surrounding passengers. The same people who had watched with either amusement or discomfort were now silent witnesses to something rare: accountability. Elena studied Patricia for a long moment. She could see the discomfort, the inner battle of a woman forced to confront her own prejudice. "Apology accepted," Elena said finally, her voice steady. "But remember, it was never about me. It was about how you choose to see people." Patricia nodded, looking down, the lesson seared into her mind. As she walked away, Elena leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. She had no doubt that Patricia would never make the same mistake again. Some lessons are painful, but necessary. Outside the window, the clouds stretched endlessly, the sky vast and open, just like the possibilities for those willing to see beyond their own limitations. And you, have you ever been judged by your appearance? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their color or status, give it a like and subscribe.